Do you have a science center in your classroom? I get asked often about how to set up learning centers and what I recommend having in each center in the preschool or pre-K classroom. Now, the thing to remember about setting up a successful science center is that just because you have one doesn't mean your kids will want to go there. Just having a bunch of stuff on the shelves doesn't mean your science center is going to be successful. Now, when I was a student, I didn't really like science very much. I remember it was a boring subject that I really never looked forward to. And in the 6th grade, I remember that my teacher used to stand in front of the class and do science experiments on her desk. But since I was one of the tallest kids in the class, I sat in the very back of the room. We had more than 20, probably 30 students in the class, and I couldn't see a thing. It was so super frustrating, right? But here's the thing, real science isn't about a bunch of random experiments that the teacher does in front of the class. Then, when I was in 11th grade, I had a biology class that was just memorizing vocabulary and definitions. That was it. I learned nothing else. I did well in that class, but I don't remember any of the words. Really, all I learned how to do was to memorize things, right? And it turns out that science isn't about memorization either. Here's the thing. Science in the early childhood classroom is more about helping young children think and try to make sense of the world around them. So what does that mean for your science center? So how can you get your kids thinking about the world around them? What does that actually look like? Well, I can tell you what it doesn't look like. It's not just having a bunch of stuff in your science center. More is not better. And I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. It does not need to look like Lakeshore threw up in your science center. Now, don't get me wrong. I puffy heart love Lakeshore. But my point here is that you don't need to go overboard. When you're intentional and thoughtful about how you select items to put into your science center, your students will be more successful. Having a successful science center is more about how you introduce the items or materials that you have there and how you set your students up for success with those things. So before we can dive into the how, first we need to understand the why. Why is having a science center in your classroom important? And for preschoolers, their daily lives are science. Think about it. Science is around us every single day, right? It's what we see. Is it raining, snowy, cloudy, or sunny outside? Weather is science. We can feel science. Is it hot, cold, damp, or just right outside? We can hear science. Do you hear the birds, insects, animals, or planes and cars when you go outside? For science learning to be truly effective for young children, it requires their hands-on interaction with things, right? Things that are in their natural world, things that they can see and hear and feel. It's about giving them time to investigate and manipulate those materials and time to think about how these things work. So how do you make that work in your classroom? How do you set up this successful science center? Well, just like any other center in your classroom, you're going to label all the things in it, right? You've got labels in your math center. You've got labels on everything in your block center, and you're going to label all the things in your science center. And I have labels you can use, or you can use your smartphone, take your own photos, make your own labels. And then you're going to want to have a center sign. Just like every other center in your classroom has a center sign, you're going to have one as well in the science center. The image is for the children because they can't read these words yet, right? The image is for the children. So every time you say, this is your turn in the science center, or they go, they're choosing or whatever, they have this image to represent science center because they can't read yet. The words here on the bottom, all these little words, those are for the adults, so that the adults in the classroom, whether it's yourself, your assistant, or parents, volunteers, specialists, whoever, they understand the importance of the Science Center as well. And again, these are in the Pre-K Pages shop. If you don't already have a set, you can go grab them there. So that brings me to the types of tools you're going to want to have in your Science Center. So some things you can keep out all the time if you want to. Other people like to just rotate things out according to whatever they're learning about in the topic of science at that time. But there are some basic staples that I always like to have available. Maybe not to the students all the time, but I rotate them out. And one of those are magnets, right? This is a kid-friendly horseshoe magnet. And so it has a little magnet in each end here, and it has a little handle. It's very durable and sturdy. It's not one of those really heavy industrial magnets they would use like in a real science lab. This is a kid-friendly one. Of course, anytime you have magnets out, you want to make sure that you really establish the rules around magnets, because if they get near a laptop or a device, that's not good. So they have to keep them away from all electronics. And these are very kid-friendly and durable, and they don't break and all that. So these are safe for young children to use in the Science Center. So I have these in my teacher cabinet, closet, whatever you want to call it, to use in the Science Center when needed, right? So this is a staple of what you would use in the Science Center. And then, of course, we use magnifying glasses for everything, right? There's always something to observe in the Science Center, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I always have magnifying glasses available. Again, this is a really kid-friendly one. It's safety glass, it's not breakable. It's got a nice sturdy plastic handle. And of course, you're going to want to teach them how to use a magnifying glass, because they all just want to put it right on top of their eye. And you want to teach them how to hold it and where to point it and all of that. Of course, they like to look at each other, and they like to look at their hands, their fingers, all that kind of stuff. That's fine. We're going to primarily use these, or teach them how to use these, to observe the things in the Science Center, specific things. And we'll get to that in a minute. And then the other thing that I always have available, these are always out in my Science Center because they kind of attract the kids like moths to a flame. And these are what I used to call, if you've been around the block a few times like me, we used to call these Viewmasters back in the day. And then they stopped making them. They were kind of old school. And I found out that my kids loved them because I went to a garage sale and I found a bunch, and the lady had all the reels. They were in good condition, and I put them in my Science Center because there's like a lot of nature types of reels. And when I say reel, I'm talking about this part here. There's a lot of nature ones, like with birds and animals and things like that, insects. So I used to put them in my Science Center, and my kids just loved, you hold them up to the light, and then when you push down on the lever, it changes the picture that they see. So it's kind of like binoculars with pictures in them. And the kids go crazy for these. And I gathered a whole bunch, several different types at different garage sales over the years, and a lot of reels. I still have a lot of reels, and I put them in my Science Center, and it was always an attraction. A lot of kids like to look at them. But then Lakeshore, speaking of Lakeshore, right? We all love Lakeshore. They came out with these science viewers, and you can get the whole set. I think there's 3 in a set. Each one is a different color, and then the reels go with the different colored ones. So this one looks like wild animals, like there's a lion and things like that. But each one of the different colors goes with a different set of reels. And they're color coded. And I love that idea, because then you can have, if you're learning about wild animals, take out the wild animals set and put the Viewmaster there, and it's different. But again, kids just love these. I actually have currently in my tutoring classroom, I have my Science Center set up kind of near the door when kids come in. That's just the way that the room worked out. And one of the first things that my kids do when they come into my tutoring classes is they always gravitate to these. And so as they're coming in, putting their things away, settling in, they'll grab these and sit down and just start looking at them. And it's kind of a great transition into the classroom, to be honest. It's nothing I planned, but it's just funny. And they always look at them when they're getting ready to go too. There's always somebody over there looking at the Viewmaster when they should be getting their coat and their backpack on. So they love these I call them Viewmasters. Lakeshore calls them science viewers. Another great thing that you can put in your science center, or you can use in your science center, are discovery bottles. Some people like to call them sensory bottles. It's really more about how you use them. It depends on what you want to call them. But we have some discovery bottles here on the screen for you. And you can do them for lots of different themes. You can make them yourself using plastic water bottles, right? Those are just going to go in the recycling bin anyway. So why not reuse them and turn them into discovery bottles? They're not for children to open or explore the contents. These are strictly for looking. And so with my discovery bottles, I might put my magnifying glasses. So you could have, let's say you're doing seeds and a planting like spring type of a thing in your classroom, right? And so in your science center, then you might have some spring discovery bottles as well as the magnifying glass. And so that's one thing that you can kind of rotate out as well. Okay, so now I am going to talk about my trays. So one thing in my current science center, I have 4 trays. Each one is a different color, as you can see here on the screen. This one is blue. And in one tray, I have a science notebook here. So each child in my class gets a science notebook. This one here is from my trees and leaves science unit. And there's no cutting required. You just fold and staple. And so for every one of our like science focuses, there is a science notebook. So you can have a basket of these, and you can put them in the tray or next to the tray along with some crayons and pencils. And they're going to be making observations about what they see in the science center. So I'm probably also going to have a display of leaves and pine cones and different things. And they can record what they see in their science notebook. So that's one tray. And this would be considered kind of like a writing activity. So I would probably use a little photo here. I could use a little photo here of a hand writing. I just haven't done that yet. Okay, then I'm going to have another tray with books for reading. And again, you could have a little icon inside the tray of a book, but it's pretty self-explanatory when there are books in the tray. I'm just going to highlight in this tray a couple of books that I think are really pivotal for the trees and leaves unit. And this is the nonfiction science book that goes with this particular science unit in my shop. And I have one of these books in every single one of the science units. And then, of course, I'm going to pair that nonfiction book, this kid-friendly nonfiction book, with a fiction book. This is Lois Ehlert's Red Leaf, Yellow Leaf, which is always something I start my plant and seed unit, trees and leaves unit. Sorry, I got ahead of myself there. But I also have a basket of books always in the science center, along with magnifying glasses so they can look inside those books to see things. Some of the other types of books I might have, these types of nonfiction books. I love these National Geographic Kids Look and Learn. So if I was learning about bugs, I might put this one in here. And here's one about planting and gardening that I use with my plants and seeds unit. So having a tray of some featured books, like these are the books that go with the theme. And then in this green tray, I have an activity, right? This is, again, from the trees and leaves unit. And in this particular activity, they're going to be sorting the leaves by color. And so they can select leaves from this little bowl. This bowl is from our Dramatic Play Center. And they can just sort the leaves by color here. So usually there's a science activity of some sort as well. And I just put those in the green tray, and I could put a little picture of hands here or whatever type of icon I want to describe activity. So there's going to be a tray with an activity. And then in this particular case, I have another activity here. And this one for the trees and leaves unit is leaf rubbing. And so obviously, this is a fake leaf. You would want a real leaf for your leaf rubbing, but they can put the leaf under the paper. They can write their name, so they're getting writing practice. They can use crayons to rub the leaves. And so that's another activity you can use in your science center. So each tray has something different in it. I have 2 activity trays, one with featured books and one with observations. And I forgot to mention about the books. We also have 3 separate science book lists over at Pre-K Pages. We'll make sure those are linked for you in the show notes, where you have all of my teacher-approved, kid-friendly science picture books or nonfiction books that you can put in your science center. So the general rule of thumb when I'm selecting things to put in the science center is there has to be something they can touch, right? So those were the activities in the trays, something they can observe, right? And usually I like to have something living or growing in the science center. So things that you could grow, even if you have a black thumb, because I have a black thumb and even I did some of these things like growing vegetable scraps, right? Did you know that you can take celery and put it in a little bit of water in a bowl and it will start growing again? The same for sweet potatoes and all kinds of table scraps that you can grow again just by placing them in water. And I have blog posts about both of those types of things that I just mentioned, the celery and the sweet potato. And I'll put links in the show notes below for you to those blog posts as well with details on how to do it. And then for planting, very simple things, things that grow really quickly, like grass and radishes. These things are super simple to do, but highly engaging for kids, right? Now, you don't need to water table scraps, but if you have had your kids plant grass or seeds of any kind and you put out a water bottle, then they can spray them with water to water them and they're getting fine motor practice, right? And of course, butterflies are always a great thing that you can kind of grow, if you will, in your science center. And those are a highlight of every child's preschool experience, right? Of course, if you work in a childcare setting, you're going to want to check with licensing before you start planting or growing anything or you have any critters in the classroom. So generally speaking, there's always something to read in the science center. There's something to record your observations, and there's something where you can communicate the results. So in those trays I showed you, something to read was obviously the tray with books. Something to record was obviously the science journal, and they're recording the results in there. And some of the activities could also be considered recording, right? This is your leaf rubbing. That was kind of recording. Okay, I know you've got questions, and hopefully I can give you some answers here. What if, and this is a big if because I think every teacher out there can relate to this one. What if I have absolutely no time in my jam-packed day? How can I give them time to investigate the materials in the science center? And of course, the answer to that one is very easy and obvious, and that is center time, right? So we're going to have our science center open during center time, right? And now I know that question leads to another one for a lot of folks, and that is, okay, but my kids don't like going to the science center. How do I get them to go there? And the way you get kids to go there is you set up your procedures and your routines very early in the year. Of course, we all do that. And then you're going to make sure that you introduce the things that are there when you rotate items out. So I kind of think of it like a show, right? It's almost like the science center show when I switch out the focus that we're going to have in the science center. And you introduce it and you say, today at the Science Center, we have something brand new. We're going to be learning about seeds and how seeds grow. So when you go to the Science Center today, here's what you'll find. And I preview those items with them and we talk about them. Does it have to be a full-blown 15-minute extravaganza? No, it doesn't. Because there's not a lot of things there, right? If I just have those 4 trays, I'm going to show them those 4 trays. The other stuff, if it's there all year, they're already familiar with that. And you might say, like, if there's always magnifying glasses, you might say, and you can take a magnifying glass and you can look at the leaves or pine cones or whatever it is you have there, right? So you can highlight some of those things you always have. If you have a science viewer for that, you can say, and we have the science viewer that you can look at and then record what you see in the science viewer in your science journal, right? That's key too. So the bottom line is it's all about how it's presented to them, how much time you spend introducing them to it, and then of course, reinforcing when they're there, like, oh, I see that Jamal is using the science viewer and he's recording his observations in his science journal or his science notebook, things like that. That is how you're going to get your kids to A, go there, and B, keep them engaged in the center and the materials. So anytime they're not wanting to go there or they're not engaged in the materials, you're going to want to revisit that center with them. That means if they're not engaged, revisit what they can do with the materials. And if they don't want to go there, review what's there with them and say, don't forget, today at the Science Center, you can do X, Y, Z. And then the third question I get all the time about science centers is, I have no room. Like teachers all know, early childhood teachers know that they have to have blocks. They have to have dramatic play. There are certain centers we have to make room for, right? Because we can't teach without them. So sometimes the science center gets squeezed out and it gets very little space. There's nothing wrong with that, right? You don't have to have a gigantic science center that takes up a quarter of your room or more, right? You can have a very successful science center with just 4 trays. Even if those trays are stored in a box when they're not in use or in a file crate or some such thing like that, you can still have a science center. If you're going to do the 4-tray method, just bring those 4 trays out during center time and put them in a table. That could be a science center, right? I've worked with teachers before who are in incredibly small classrooms, like I don't even know how they can be classrooms. They're so small. And during center time, they pull out the milk crates and they put one on each table, and those are the 4 centers. Well, we got to get creative, right? So next up is, how do you get your kids to think about the results, right? We talked about that, thinking about the world around them, and how do you get them to do that kind of thing? And so when we're talking about results, it might be like our observations of something. It might be, we watched these seeds that we planted and then they grew, it might be that kind of thing. How are we going to communicate what happened to the world? Because that's what scientists do. That's part of the scientific process. And that's going to take place probably more in a whole group. You're going to do graphs and charts and label drawings, and even your science journals are a way to communicate, right? So you can have a very successful science center in your classroom following some of the steps that I laid out for you here today. And thinking back on my own science center and some of the success stories over the years, I've had fish in my science center that we had all year. I know there's controversy over fish in the classroom. Let's just put all that aside. But the fish were super motivating for my students, certain students in particular, who would come in first thing in the morning, look at the fish, say good morning to whatever his name was. I don't remember because it changed every year as we got new fish because they don't live that long. Say hello to the fish. They would record their, observations of the fish. Let's hope they don't ever record that he's floating on the top of the water. I usually caught that when I came in early in the morning before they got there. Things like that. They love, love, love that. Sometimes I would add little things to the fish bowl, like little, you can buy fish decor, things for the fish tank at the pet store. And I would put those in there and they just thought that was a hoot. And I would be like, there's something new in the fish tank for you to record in your science journal this week. Everyone should take a turn going over there this week and look for it and see what it is. And of course, some smarty always shouts out, I saw it. It's a treasure chest. Something like that. It's a pirate ship. So things like that. My kids just loved having something living in the science center. And then of course, growing. The great thing about growing is that you're going to see changes gradually over time, of course, and it really helps them understand about waiting for something and waiting for these things to grow. Now, the secret to that, because I've had so many people over the years tell me, I can't grow anything. I have a black thumb. Everything I do dies or it doesn't work. Plant multitudes, right? So if you got 20 kids, plant 30 of something or 40 even, that way. So you could have each kid plant 2. The odds are that some of these things are going to grow. maybe they were overwatered, so next time don't water them as much. Or maybe they weren't watered enough, and so water them more. Maybe there wasn't enough drainage in the cup. One thing that I notice a lot of teachers do when they plant things in the classroom, in the science center, is there's no drainage for the water. So sometimes whatever's in the cup gets moldy. So think about how you're going to aerate your cups, things like that. Just be creative and plant way, way more than you need, and you will have some success. I've never had something that did not grow for at least some of the students, but I learned early on to plant extras, right? So when they have something to look at, like something living or something growing, it's going to be highly attractive for them to go there, right? So that's how you get their buy-in and their engagement. And then when they're there for those things, those are like the stars of the show, then you can work in the things like, let's look at some books about this topic, about fish or about plants and seeds, or about, whatever the topic might be, bugs, whatever it is. Work in some books about that. Work on recording what they see in their science notebooks. This is so easy almost. Like once they learn that the science notebook is part of the science center, it's something that they will go and grab. Like, oh, I see there's a treasure chest in the fishbowl. I'm going to get my science notebook or science journal and I'm going to draw that in there. That's just something we do when we go to that center. That becomes second nature to them. And then the two activities are the only things that are really new to them, because the books might change, but that one tray is always books. And the science journal titles might change, but that tray is always about the science journal, whatever it is. So those two things are constant, remain the same. We just change out what's in them. And then the other two are activities to go along with whatever the topic is. So that makes it super easy and not too overwhelming for you. And I never worry about, did every kid go to the science center and do their science journal this week? Did every kid go there and do that science activity this week? I don't worry about that kind of stuff. I just make sure that when kids are there, that they're engaged. And if not, then I'm going to change something that I did to get them to have more success at that center. The other question I get a lot is, what if they destroy the things in my science center? And again, that goes back to how are we introducing the materials to the children, and how are we setting up the routines and the procedures in that center? So if something like that happened, I would take a step back and I would review those routines and procedures again, because maybe they've forgotten how to treat the materials. Maybe they've forgotten how to put them where they go, or they're being too rough with the magnifying glasses or something like that. So that's just time for me to take a step back and reteach some of those routines and procedures in the science center. Or maybe some of the things you had out this week were not, maybe they missed the day where you introduced or previewed all the things, right? So you're going to want to go back and do that again. Even your most active students will enjoy the Science Center when it's done right, because it's interesting, it's novel, right? Things are changing there all the time. It allows them time to explore, ask questions, and think about science. And that ultimately increases the engagement in that center. Having a well-stocked Science Center is awesome, but let's face it, a science center can't make you a better teacher. The information that I shared with you in this episode of Elevating Early Childhood is just a small taste of what our students inside Teaching Trailblazers have access to 24/7. Teaching Trailblazers is where early childhood professionals like you can go to fine-tune your teaching practice with on-demand professional development courses, access to our complete curriculum for free, and much more. And as always, if you like this episode of Elevating Early Childhood, please subscribe or leave a rating and review on iTunes. Until next time, I'm Vanessa Levin. Onward and upward. If you think these videos are valuable, you have got to come check out the Teaching Trailblazers program. Teaching Trailblazers is the place for teachers like you to get the professional development resources and support you need to thrive. It's where you can learn relevant, life-changing best practices with professional development created specifically around the challenges early childhood teachers face. It's where you can get access to a complete research-based pre-K curriculum that you can use either to supplement your existing curriculum or use on its own to get 100% of your students kindergarten ready by the end of the year. And it's where you can hang out and connect over all things early childhood with other teachers just like you and me. It's my favorite place on earth, and it will change your teacher life, I guarantee it. Come join us at teachingtrailblazers.com to get more information and apply today. That's teachingtrailblazers.com. I can't wait to see you there.